Hey guys, we're talking about the first part of chapter 19, the Gilded Age and the Age of Industries, or Rise of Industries. First, we have to start with railroads. Railroads boom after the Civil War, mainly due to Lincoln's use of them during the Civil War and also his Pacific Railway Act of the 1860s. They become the first large corporations in the United States that are going to be the most powerful instruments during that time. They got a lot of help from the federal government. They were given a lot of large land grants to the railroad. The railroads were also able to take land that wasn't used by the Homestead Act, and they even got monetary loans, meaning they got subsidies. They were able to um, expand with the use of taxpayer, well, not taxpayer money, tariff money from the governments. And by 1869, we have our first transcontinental railroad that connected Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean when the Central Pacific and Union Pacific met. This is the Irish and Chinese workers kind of uniting between the Union Central Railways. They meet at Promontory Point, where they put a golden spike there in Utah in 1869, a massive accomplishment, outpacing England and France in terms of railroad construction. As you can see, we are well connected. Um, Most of this is, as you can see from here, comes from the land grants provided by the federal government, and we are expanding from the ones that we already had before the Civil War to ones that are created afterwards. And also, you could see the railroads were instrumental in making the standard time zones that we have today. And there's our homesteaders and their sod houses. Again, they use sod because not a lot of trees in the Great Plains. It's called plains because there are no trees. The importance of the railroads. One, it united the country from east to west. It created an immense amount of jobs between the people who were laying down the tracks to the engineers to the new industries that could utilize the railroads, such as mining, agriculture, and whatever else. Um, from the west, they would carry these raw materials to the east. The east had the industries and the factories to produce stuff, and the finished goods would come back to the west. So it's kind of like an England, American colonies type dynamics that we saw in the American Revolution. It helped with the mining and agriculture in the West because they would be able to carry this coal and this iron ore and the silver and the gold all throughout the country, and it made it a lot easier. It supported larger cities due to the immigration. Immigrants could come into Ellis Island or any other ports and be transported all throughout the country. Stayed in time zones, as I made, and makers and millionaires. Tons of people became wealthy as a result of the utility of the railroads and its expandability. As you can see, these are some of the chief manufacturing cities in the red. We have copper mining, mostly in the west, iron and steel mills, mostly around our area, which is nice. Coal country, as you can see right here, that have been suffering the last few years since nobody really used coal. And all this stuff was being able to be brought to a second market revolution during this time period all over the country. And we even have the Sears Roebuck catalog becoming popular. Based in Chicago, you can get a catalog out in Wyoming. You can order a nice little organ like this or anything else, pay a shipment, and the trains would bring this beautiful organ to your sod house. Awesome. And as you could see, we have me at Ellis Island, where the trains would bring people all over the country. So, for example, this was a train from Ellis Island, Jersey City, which brought a lot of Hungarian and Poles and Ukrainians to Chrome, a part of Carteret. Pretty much a ghetto of Ukrainian and Polish people that worked in steel and chrome mills. Pretty cool. But we have Poles going to Pittsburgh. We have the Germans who are going out west. We have the Irish who are going out west in Boston and Baltimore and New York and Newark. We have the Italians who are going to New Jersey, New York, and also Boston. So all over the place. Problems with the railroads. They formed into monopolies. What these large companies would do is they would form pools. So, a pool is an agreement to divide the business in a given area and share the profits. So, instead of competing against each other, they thought it was more efficient to create these pools, similar to what cable companies do today. You'll get a certain region, we won't go into that region, and as a result, we'll jack the prices up and share the profits. They also use rebates, which were kickbacks to large shippers and corporations. So if you own a steel mill, um, a train company, railroad company would give you a rebate if you only use their trains in their service. And as a result, they got these steel and oil companies and whatever companies would be able to ship their stuff more cheaply. And the railroads, to make their money back, is they would charge higher prices to farmers and smaller companies and corporations. And they would even charge higher rates for a short haul compared to a long haul. So if you were only going about 12 miles, you would have triple the price of somebody who was going 100 miles. They manipulated the profits. This is what they called cooking the books. They would say the profits were X amount, even though it was probably millions of dollars less than that. And this inflated the stock prices as a result. They had lobbyists and they corrupted public officials, especially at the state legislatures. The reason why they went after state legislatures is because state legislatures were responsible for electing U.S. senators. And if you control the state legislatures, then you controlled the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. Senate was responsible for making most of the laws. Some of the railroad titans, Vanderbilt, New York, James J. Hill, you could see the pooling going on with this. They all had different regions and they kind of stayed out of each other's zones. Here's an image of them carving up little spheres of influence all over the country and charging large prices for people to do business. Another little political cartoon from that time period. We have Vanderbilt right here, all right, competing against who is this? James J. Hill. No relation, I don't think. Another political cartoon, as you could see, these rich guys, you could tell they're rich because they are large and fat. That shows their greediness. And they are making their money on the backs of all these poor wage workers, most of them being immigrants. The government does play a role in trying to regulate this stuff. We have a first challenge of state laws. Munn versus Illinois. Illinois had pressure from this Granger group, these farmers who were um, discontented about how the railroads treated them. Illinois brought a law saying that states can regulate the railroad. It went all the way to Supreme Court, and they agreed. The Supreme Court ruled with Illinois that they did have the right to regulate railroads. Eventually, this gets overturned with Wabash versus Illinois. This overturned the Munn case, saying that the states could not regulate, but the federal government could regulate the Interstate Commerce Act according to the Constitution. But there was no laws in place that allowed for the federal government to do that until we have the ICA, which is the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. They created a commission that would investigate if railroads or any other businesses was that went across state lines was violating laws. You could not produce any pools or rebates. These large corporations still got around it, and you had to publish your rates, so they were all fair. None of this one rate for large corporations and a higher rate for a small time farmer. Now, trusts are a group of companies controlled by a single board. Essentially, it becomes more efficient if you get all your competition to work together. But when this happens, that means it usually leads to monopolies. Monopolies are going to lead to higher prices and less quality. And this hurts most consumers, especially in a capitalist country. Two ways to form trust. One, we have vertical integration, which is where a company tries to control every step of the manufacturing process. The person that was great at doing that was Andrew Carnegie in the steel industry. Here's a example of it. Using the meat industry, you would own every single process from the cattle all the way to the warehouse where you would sell the meat. All right, so the slaughterhouses, the trains, the delivery wagons, everything would be bought in this vertical. So, again, every step of the process. The other way to do it was horizontal integration. This is to allow with competitors to control an entire market. Rockefeller was good at this. To give you an example, if you were Nike and you undercut all your prices and you made it cheap, all right, you cut your prices of shoes to